Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent in Kyiv. Let's move from Kyiv, let's go to London. Let's bring in John Lough, the geopolitical analyst, commentator, head of foreign policy at the new Eurasian Strategies Centre, NEST. John, welcome to France 24. Always great to have you with us. And we were talking about who's in the room today. Who should we know about? Notably that the head of Russia's intelligence unit, the GRU, is amongst them. A significant factor? Do you hold the same kind of despairing thought in terms of where this could go as Gulliver, or do you see room for manoeuvre here?
Well, I would say it's not a particularly high-ranking Russian delegation. The two names that I've heard of are the head of the Russian military intelligence service, and also the person Kirill Dmitriev, who has been involved in earlier negotiations and who is a businessman and who is the direct counterpart of Steve Witkoff. So this looks like an effort on the Russian side to keep the negotiating process going, but not with, I think, any serious commitment to seeing it through to a successful end. We have to be clear here that Putin sees, I think, mainly the opportunity in this process through the fact that he thinks that Trump can exercise influence both over Zelensky, President Zelensky, and over Ukraine's European allies to persuade them that there really is no point continuing the fight because Russia is eventually going to win. And this, in other words, would be a way, as Putin sees it, to accelerate a victorious outcome. So I'm afraid I share the caution or indeed pessimism of your correspondent in Kiev. I think the Ukrainian expectations of these talks are very low. They know exactly what the Russian strategy is. They can see it being implemented now with extreme brutality in terms of the just targeting of the energy infrastructure during this cold snap. And this is an effort on the part of Moscow to try to break the will of the Ukrainian people to continue the war. But we see no sign that the Ukrainians are giving up, even though they're numerically outnumbered. The Russians are advancing places on the battlefield, but it's actually a relatively still static picture. And that's how it has been over, the last 3 years or so now. And the thought that this war is entering its 5th year. And Russia controls around 20% of Ukrainian territory. This war has gone, I think, so far very, very badly for the Russians, and their economy is starting to hurt. And I think there have to be questions raised just about how credible this strategy is of Putin, because he's been talking for months and probably over a year now about the possibility of the Ukrainians collapsing any moment.
Two thoughts there. First of all, I guess what the Donbas gives in its vast territory is the industrial heartland. The coal mining area, Luhansk and Donetsk, because we know most of, if not all, bits of no man's land in Luhansk are occupied. And there's still, I think, maybe about 20% of Donetsk, depending on different analysis, that is still in Ukrainian hands. We're talking about Pokrovsk as well, in and amongst that. I just wonder your thoughts, because you talk about, this is for Russia, it's not what they wanted, but this allows Putin, doesn't it, to present something that, kind of a golden gem of Ukraine, the Donetsk. As you say, there's a kind of, they're marching slowly towards it as well. And I do wonder whether actually we're going to see that issue go away, because the Study of War, the Institute of Study of War, estimates it would take Russian troops up until, quote, August next year to conquer the rest of the Donbas. It goes back to your other point that the leverage is slowly diminishing, isn't it?
Well, I think it is to some extent. We have to see on the Russian side, Putin has set expectations of a rapid victory. And that's not going to come about. And I think the Ukrainians are going to continue fighting. The Russians may advance a little bit faster when the spring comes and the foliage returns and they're not as exposed. But Ukraine, I suspect, will somehow keep going with the assistance of its, in the main, its European allies. So the question is, how long can the Russians carry on? Putin wants to show something absolutely tangible. And of course, territorial acquisitions are a very useful way of showing, in principle, that the war has achieved a result. But there's a nice phrase in Russian to describe, I think, territories such as Donbas, and that is a suitcase without a handle. This is going to be a burden for Russia because the industrial assets there have been, in many cases, devastated. The attraction of coal mining these days is not as great as it used to be for obvious reasons. and those territories have been largely depopulated. So what value Russia really sees in those, I think, is limited beyond the fact that they want to get hold of the towns that are known as the fortress belt, that are really the mainstay of Ukraine's defenses in that region at the moment. Because if they can control those, then I think the path to acquiring greater influence in Ukraine, or indeed invading further, is much easier. So that's why it's such a threat for Ukraine, and why they don't want to give up that territory, particularly since they control it.
And added to that is the visceral factor, isn't it, that this territory, many of the families of soldiers say, is marked in the blood of their loved ones, people who've fallen to defend it, and what's left of it. Do you see, though, another outcome here, other than the continuation at this point? I mean, Gulliver talked about, how the government wants to continue, will not give up this territory, and it would have to go to a referendum. Do you see any, looking and analysing the political situation, any outcome which could involve a referendum in Ukraine on this territory in the Donbas?
I think it would require the military situation to deteriorate significantly for that to happen. And then you might be talking about, let's say, some division of that contested territory at the moment. This would be, of course, extremely unpopular in Ukraine, and President Zelensky has referred to this repeatedly. But right now, I think there is from what we can tell from the opinion polling, there's a consensus among Ukrainians that they must keep fighting, because if they don't, they risk losing their independence entirely. And this is what this war is about. Russia wants to deprive Ukraine of the possibility of being a viable independent state.
As always, really good to talk to you, John. John Lough, a geopolitical analyst, commentator and head of foreign policy at New Eurasian Strategies Centre. John, as always, we'll see you soon.